I'm a few years removed from my caregiving experience, but I can still feel how all consuming it was. And I was caring for my mom and my father-in-law. I can only imagine how that's amplified in a situation where you're caring for your life partner. So I guess what are your sort of opening thoughts on what makes caring for a partner so sort of unique in how it's challenging?
Well, I think it's such a disruption to your routine, to your home routine, to the memories that you have with your spouse or partner. And it really disrupts the balance in a once mutual relationship. You know, it used to be mutual, and now one side of that equation is off balance. So it changes your roles, it changes the dynamics. And I think another important thing is that it kind of blurs the lines of intimacy and vulnerability. So it's so confusing and so disrupting, and that's why I'm glad we're talking about it today.
Yeah, yeah. There's no, and so the other thing I think about is many caregivers are living under the same roof as the person they're caring for. Many aren't, but many are. And that's usually the case, in a spousal caregiving situation as well. And I just think even just that piece of it, there's no, like you can easily see how there could be quote unquote no escape, right? From
Yeah.
the caregiving responsibilities. So yeah, heavy, heavy, heavy topic. And you mentioned sort of the blurring the lines, and my head goes to sort of how do we unblur them, right? Or how do we
Right.
separate our responsibilities, caregiving from everything else, or roles really? How do we separate those roles? Like what are some initial thoughts on that? Because I feel like that is really the beginning and end of doing this in a way that people are living lives instead of just surviving.
Yeah. Yeah. So are we talking about how to separate those roles?
Yeah, just and what well, the importance of it, and then I guess we'll get into how to separate the roles. But
Okay. Yeah, yeah. I think, well, it's really important to separate the roles. I think it can be really easy to lose sight of the bond that brought you together in the first place when you're a caregiver. I think it's really important to make space for some kind of emotional closeness. And that's another good reason why you need to separate the roles. And you can do that in small ways. You could, hold hands or share a laugh over a coffee or something. But the point is, you want to remind yourselves that you're still in a relationship. You're not just managing the relationship. You're in this relationship, and it's shifted, but it's really important to separate your role. So it's just like I am first and foremost a partner and spouse, and now I'm also a caregiver.
hmm yeah. And without that, we can't do so like we think about all the stuff we talk about in many of these conversations, right? Because there are so many sort of common threads throughout maybe very different caregiving experience, but things
Yeah.
like, protecting ourselves from burnout, keeping an eye and paying attention to our own health and well-being as
Yeah.
caregivers, things like that. And I go back to, as you were talking, I was thinking about, we had a conversation about this topic a couple of years ago. I had a guest on. Her name was Mary Han Ward. She was a longtime caregiver for her husband, who was living with Parkinson's disease and had a number of other things going on. So she had been a caregiver for decades at the time we were having this conversation. She was talking to me about kind of what you were saying, and something about the way the words she used and the eye contact she held while she was saying it. But she said, I am his wife first and
Mhm.
his caregiver second, and
Mhm.
vice versa for him. He's my husband first and, my care recipient second. And if we ever lose sight of that, we're sunk, essentially, was her point, because the caregiver just gets sort of all consumed by the caregiving aspect of her life, in this case, Mary's life. And that doesn't benefit her. That only hurt. Nothing good comes of that. And then nothing good comes of it for the person receiving care, right?
Mhm.
Because the person giving the care is being ground down, right? It was just interesting as you were talking, I was brought right back to Mary on camera on Zoom, just like this, and just the sort of resolve she had when she was saying that to me, because it, as if to make the point that, you know, Like these are just, I'm just saying something, but we try and live it, because if we don't, we're up the creek.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned protecting your own health too. It's, think of all the things you're doing. You're lifting, you're showering, you're managing medications, you're making appointments. And all of those things take such a physical and cognitive load on your body, on your mind. And you need to really protect your health. And your health really matters, because if you're hurt or run down, neither one of you is going to benefit. So it's something we always focus on with our caregivers is you need to protect yourself as
Mhm.
to be your best for your loved one.
Yeah. For that reason, absolutely, 1,000,000%, but also because you deserve it. You
Yeah,
deserve to be
you bet.
protected. You
Yeah.
deserve to be healthy and well. And, like I said a minute ago, in living life, as opposed to just, you know, Groundhog Day of just the same thing day in, day out, day in, day out. And that was a really hard thing for me. I've said this before in our conversations, but that was a really hard thing for me to really get my arms around and truly believe.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly, incredibly important.
Yeah. And I think when you're doing that, when you're taking care of yourself, when you're separating your role, you're really affirming with your partner that there's more to this than just a caregiver and a care recipient. And it's a real respect thing. It's respecting your own limits and your own emotions, and you're respecting them as a human, not just a care recipient.
Right, right. Absolutely. And I love that distinction. Yeah. So I guess, well, a couple of like, everything flows from that, right? But the we deserve that as caregivers. We deserve to have a life outside of caregiving. And it so and it's easy to say, but when you're in it, and caregivers, in today's session will, I would imagine, understand, but like, how do you actually put that into practice? How do you actually live it? And there's no easy way, but at a certain point, it was a mantra for me. Like, I would just have to tell, like, I deserve this. I deserve this. This is not selfish. Saying no right now does not mean I'm being selfish. I'm not being a bad caregiver, right? It was almost like, it's so granular, but that's kind of how it started for me. And I had to really, it took work to actually get to a point where I believed it.
Mm. Yeah.
So, okay. So let's, I think main theme here is just the importance of, like, separation, division of whatever words we want to use, but division of those, I say lives, but roles and responsibilities. So, that's the foundation of all of this. But like, what does that look like in practice? Aside from, saying something over and over to yourself, like I was just
Yeah.
putting out there, but like, how can we put this into practice day to day? Like, what steps can we take to actually separate the roles?
Well, I think this is really important in the very beginning. And if it's not in the very beginning, even if it's later on, you could still do this. We talk a lot about getting to a healthcare provider and saying, what can I expect next week, next month, next year? How is this going to progress? And then you have an open conversation with your loved one and you say, how can we prepare for what's coming? And be open and honest about what matters most. How are you going to adapt while still honoring this relationship? And what parts of your connection are you unwilling to give up? Like, we are always going to do this no matter what. You start with a baseline like that, and then you could remind each other. Remember, we said we are not going to lose this part. So to me, that's a foundational way to start in beginning to separate these roles, but there's a plan.
Yeah, I think it's so important too, and it sounds so simple. Like, if I'm distilling what you're saying, it's, talk with the doctor, ask questions to, basically educate yourself on what to
Mhm.
expect, and then talk about it as a
Right.
as a as a unit, right? As a team. Sounds so simple, but it can be hard, right? It can be
Sure.
loaded, 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 heavy conversation. And
Yep.
I love the fact that when you were giving that example, you used the word we. How can we? How can we? Right? So it's like, And we talk often about the importance of the words we choose. And this is yet another case of that, because even something as simple as using the word we instead of saying, well, you need this, so I have to do that. Like, make like if there's a subtle, maybe even subliminal, like just benefit, I guess, to using the right words, right? Like making it a team thing
Yeah.
over time, because it's probably not, it's not going to be one conversation, right?
Hmm.
It's going to be, I would imagine, an ongoing conversation.
Yeah.
Or hopefully it will be, right? Like every situation isn't perfect. There absolutely can be times. And this is actually a good question. Like, what if our partner, the person that needs care, isn't open to this conversation?
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
what do we do
you
then?
you do your best. You know the person, you've been with them for however long, and so you adapt to it. But you're going to have to take on this new responsibility. And I think it's an important time to have this conversation, review the roles, and even if they're not agreeing it, you could say what you're planning on doing. You're going to say, I've decided that I'm going to take on these caregiving responsibilities. These are the ones I really have to, or that I really feel like I want to. But then I'm going to see if there's someone else, and it might be the other person, the care recipient, who can take on some tasks. And it's sharing that load and finding some way to offload some of that. So it's sort of setting the tone. Here's where we are, and this is what I'm planning on doing. And if you just keep bringing this up, at least it is a routine that the care recipient will either at least know what's going to happen, or they'll jump in and join in on this plan.
Yeah, I love it. And since you used the word plan there, something else we had on our sort of pre-show notes was creating a care plan. So
Mm.
that can be another tool in this, right? Like it's that could be sort of I see that as there's a lot of benefits to having a care plan, of course. Actually, maybe we should, just for the audience, in case people aren't familiar, what is a care plan?
It's getting logistical things out of your head and onto paper. And it could be everything from medication schedules to doctor's visits to emergency contacts. But it's what to do um, to get something off of your head or out of your head so that you can make some space and maybe focus on the relationship instead of all these responsibilities. When it's written down and it's a plan, it's much easier to follow and follow through on than coming up with a plan in a spur of the moment.
Yeah, I love it. So it's something that I love the way you said create space, because that is another really important part of this. And again, it was for me as someone who was caring for a parent, but I can just see how like the importance of these ideas are just kind of amplified in a spousal situation, because the relationship dynamic is different. It's even more loaded, right? But the care plan can serve as a tool to have you both as a unit hopefully keep coming back to every month or 3 months or 6 months or whatever you sort of agree to, right? It can be sort of an anchor to this
Mhm.
plan and keeping you together working towards something. But it
Right.
also, I just love the point you made so much about creating space. It just empties your head.
Yeah.
And that's, it sounds kind of funny to say, but that matters a lot, because you can't be present and enjoy the time if there's no vacancy up here, right?
Yeah.
If it's just full of all the stuff you have to do, logistical details, everything. If it's just without that space, it's really difficult, if not impossible, to actually have space to just be, to
Yeah.
just sit and enjoy
Yeah.
time together, whatever that
Right.
might look like now, right? So
Yeah.
I love that. So care plan, having a care plan and discussing it, and sort of introducing that in, in or just after, somewhere near that first conversation, Sheila, that you're alluding to, I think can be really beneficial, because then it's in the right context, right? It's not something new that you're adding after, and the person we're caring for is thinking, well, okay, gosh, just another thing to deal with. It's sort of part and parcel with um, this new chapter that you're embarking on together, right?
Mhm.
As a
Mhm. And one thing that I also want to bring up is in this theme of, why it's so important to have separate roles and then how to do it. You want to stay connected to the people who remind you who you are beyond the caregiving role. So it's really common for caregivers to start getting isolated. And when you get isolated, then you're all caregiving all the time and there's nothing else. And then that becomes your identity. And that's where really the burnout can creep in. So it's so important to reach out, stay connected to the people who matter to you outside of that caregiving role.
Yeah, it's a great point. Another thing that's easy to say but can be hard, right? So I guess I don't have any like magic wand advice on how to do that other than to say just kind of be like Nike, just do it, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
right.
just do it. But I guess one thing, I'm just keeping an eye on the clock. We've got about 8 minutes left. So, if the audience has questions or perspectives to share, please do share them. But I did want to talk for a minute about sort of intimacy, because we're talking, about spousal caregiving, caring for a partner. Obviously, intimacy is a big part of any relationship like that. And I guess, how do we tackle that, right? Like, there are situations, I guess we're typically thinking when we hear intimacy about sexual relations and all that sort of stuff. And that can continue in some caregiving experiences, others it can't, right? But for situations where it can't, like I just feel like this is a little bit of an elephant in the room type topic, spousal caregiving. So like, what are some thoughts on how to handle that? How to maybe grieve that? Like, how do we manage that change, I guess?
I think it's a matter, and we'll call it like intimacy connection, right? So
Right.
it's how can you stay connected in a new way? And this could happen in all different kinds of ways along the course of your relationship, even when it's outside the caregiving role, like something shifting, right? So it's about adapting to the new person, the new part of the relationship. And so I think that's where it's really important to go back to the values, what's important to you, and find whatever it is that you can still do. And like I was saying earlier, even if it's just like we always had coffee together in the morning, well, maybe you can't do that, but what else can you do that will give you that same feeling? Those partner to partner moments are really important. So you just want to find a way to preserve an emotional closeness, whatever that is for you and however you can get it done.
Yeah, I love that. As you're talking, you're bringing me back to Mary's comments, who I was referring to, and we talked a lot about that, and she was sharing a similar sentiment, which is really around redefining what intimacy
Right.
is, it means to them in their relationship, right? And um, there were a number of different ways that they did that, right? So just interesting to hear you kind of pick up on the same thread, and that is really helpful. We do have one comment from the audience. It says, one thing that's helped me a lot is yoga. It keeps me healthy in body and mind, also keeps me connected to others. So I
Um,
love it. Very glad to hear that. And thank you for sharing your perspective. And whether it's yoga or anything else, right? As long as ideally it's something like yoga that has a multitude of benefits, right? There are physical health benefits as well as mental with something like yoga, but anything, whether it's, just getting like you say all the time, Sheila, just getting outside for 5 or 10 minutes, moving, anything like that is wonderful. So great to hear that. And then uh I just had another thought, but when we went to the chat, it escaped me. Oh no. Shoot. Oh, okay. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was boundaries, right? And we're kind of
Mhm.
talking about boundaries. We haven't used that word per se yet.
Right.
Um, but this isn't really, um, I guess more than anything, this is an affirmation, right? That setting boundaries is not selfish. Like, I just want to say that out loud and lay that bare here
Right.
for the audience, right? Which can be hard to grapple with sometimes. I guess we all know what boundaries are, but the best way to start, in my opinion, um, and you can start small, right? You're not going to just have all these boundaries built in, overnight, because it does take practice. And like
Hmm.
saying no was actually one of the most helpful practicing, like actually getting in the habit of saying no and doing whatever I had to do to get comfortable with saying no.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about no to external sort of um, you know, people or things that were competing for my time. I'm also saying no. I'm also talking about saying no to the person I'm caring for in certain
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah, and it goes back to a conversation. You know, it's important to be really open and honest about what you can and can't do physically, emotionally, logistically, and talk about it. So once again, you could say, you know, I really want to be here for you, but I also am going to need a few hours each day to run errands or take care of myself. Let's talk about how we can make that work. So
Mhm.
you're including them in the conversation about how you can get off on your own so that it works for both of you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But just emphasis, it takes practice
Yeah.
and it's hard. So we have a
Yeah.
couple other comments that are sort of picking up on what the comment I mentioned a minute ago. But walking, giggling, singing, humming, cooking
Yeah.
together, playing together. So cooking is a great example of like we've talked somewhat frequently on these sessions about enrolling. Like, we want to at the center of our caregiving, all of our goals as caregivers are obviously to keep our loved ones healthy as can be and well as can be and given their situation, but it's also about preserving their dignity, helping them find a sense of purpose, these sorts of things. So when I see cooking together mentioned in this comment, I just think it's awesome because it's something your loved one and what they can do and what they can't do, and what they're if they're interested in cooking, absolutely bring them into the kitchen and have them help, and just enrolling them in as much of that process. That's the only thing better, like doing some of these things together is the only thing better than doing them on your own as a caregiver. You know what I
Right.
mean? So thank you for offering that sentiment. Really appreciate it. And oh my gosh, look, time flies when we're having fun. We're at the bottom of the hour. So Sheila, we have some. Okay, I got a question, important question. Sorry that we're going to extend here. Very
Sure.
important question. How do you know when you need to move your partner to assisted living?
Mm. We've talked about this a lot. And for me, it always comes down to safety. And it's safety for them and safety for you. So in a lot of cases, we're talking with people who are caring for someone who either is very stubborn and won't use a walker, or they have dementia and they aren't able to do things the way that we would like them to do it. So are there recent falls or near falls? Are they leaving the stove on? Are they creating a sense of danger around them? That's a good indication that it's time that you need more help. And then also, if your safety is at risk, if you are physically exhausted because you haven't slept in 2 days, or you've been lifting too much, I mean, or trying to get them up and out. And so to me, it's always about safety. And then you just ask yourself, how can I separate and what's really important for me to do and what is safest for them, what's best for them.
Yeah. So I agree 1,000,000% with everything you said, Sheila. I would also add safety number one, or 1A, and quality of life for all the same reasons you're talking about, but quality of
Yeah.
life for you as the caregiver, but also your partner who you're caring for. And,
Yeah.
and there's a lot to unpack in this question. This is something that our care advocates help people think through and sort of just work through all the time. So I urge you, whoever asked that question, to please, let us be there for you as you're starting to think
Mhm.
about this stuff. But the quality of life aspect, and my mom is a great example. She was living alone, uh, just refused to move. She wouldn't move in with us, wouldn't move anywhere. But I could see her, and now I have the benefit of hindsight, but I could see her just go inward and get more and more isolated as she was
Yeah.
getting unsure and scared to do the things that she would normally do. But she lit up, and the transition wasn't all roses, right? But when we moved her to assisted living, like once she got through the transition, she lit up because she was a social, very social person. She was still capable and loved to be physically active, right? The
Right.
assisted living like gave her these opportunities that she didn't have when she was living at home. So, it's safety and quality of life for all parties, right? And the last thing I'd say on that is, Sheila, going back to your point on making space, right? We were talking about in our heads, but this is another example of that. It's slightly
Yeah.
different. If we make that transition, if we feel like that's the right thing, you're not suddenly you're not having to carry all the other things that you're having to carry when you're living together. And when you are together, you can just be.
Yeah.
There's more space to enjoy that time
Yeah.
together.
Imagine visiting and being fully refreshed and having something to give to the
Right.
conversation and not having in your head, oh my gosh, I have to actually go do all these things. That's gone.
Right.
You get to enjoy your time. That's a great.
Exactly. And we're oversimplifying here. We're in a sort of responding to a comment on video. Like, it's making this decision isn't easy. The
Right.
transition isn't necessarily easy. And there isn't a right answer. What's right for one person may not be right for another. It's what comes down to you. But uh, these are things to consider when you're doing that math in your head. So
Yep.
we've gone over time by 3 minutes. Apologies for that. Any last thoughts for the group, Sheila?
I think it's what we said. I think it's balance. It starts with boundaries, find ways to stay connected, whatever that means to you. And I always end with please ask for support and you can think of support as a strategy that might help you to ask for help, but that's so key.
Yeah, agreed. I guess I'll go to my standard sort of last thought, which is you're doing the best you can, and let that be enough. It is enough, and just keep going. So we appreciate you being here, Sheila. Thanks as always, and we'll see everyone next month. Okay.
Take care,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.